Welcome, Delaware County Alliance, to our second teaching on Ecclesiastes. Hope, are you excited to do this?
I am excited. It's my first time teaching with you, Stephen.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun.
Yeah.
So if you've been following with us, Brad opened up the teaching last week, and he talked about the word hevel pretty early on in the teaching. And hevel, it's actually the Hebrew word for what in our Bibles is translated as meaninglessness or vanity. And the Bible Project, I really like how they talk about this word. They actually compare it to smoke or like a vapor. And they're not saying, when the book or the author of Ecclesiastes is saying like work is meaningless or pleasure is meaningless, money is meaningless, he's not necessarily saying they're bad. He's saying that they're empty in themselves. Just like a smoke isn't like something you can grab onto, it's like temporary, it's fleeting. So are all these things. So the author of Ecclesiastes is basically saying if you attempt to find meaning in these things apart from God, they are empty, they are meaningless, but they're not necessarily bad in themselves. But today we're actually going to be talking about work and asking the question, is work meaningless? Or why is the author of Ecclesiastes saying work is meaningless? But Hope, how would you say the Bible talks about work, or how would you explain what work is?
Yeah. So one thing we've done a lot this year, and I think it's one of the reasons why we started off with our first series being creation, is you can find a lot of answers in Genesis of just what the original intention for things are. And so we kind of see in this creation account that man was created, and even God created things to like have order. And so we see like this work that is already built into our world and into creation, where we are a part of this system that is helping to put things into order and to have it flourish, to have plants flourish, to have animals flourish, to just see this creation work well together. And so we also just kind of talked about, Stephen and I, how work isn't necessarily what you get a paycheck for. You can see work in your daily life. It can be mowing your lawn, doing your dishes, paying your taxes. So it's not just what you receive money for. It's also homeschooling your kids during coronavirus.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of work right now that I know a lot of you have been experiencing. Not me so much. So that was kind of nice to not have an extra thing to juggle in the season. But so just this activity that's a part of every day.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if someone could say, I do no work.
Yeah.
Even the laziest people do a little bit of work. So
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's so true, Hope. Yeah, you and I were joking that if you think that work is only what you get paid for, God didn't get a paycheck for creation for 6 days.
No.
So the another thing Brad kind of opened up at the beginning last week was he was talking about how the author or the teacher in Ecclesiastes, he almost paints this picture of him walking around his kingdom and making these observations. So like, for example, these are just like a bunch of excerpts put together. I, the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, or all is smoke, and a striving after the wind. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. What gain has the worker for his toil? So Brad kind of put it in Delaware terms, and I'll do that. I was actually, this is real. I went on a walk, Hope, to observe all that is done in Delaware, Ohio under the sun. And behold, I saw a tiny, bright blue robin egg that was splattered on the ground. And I thought of how all the effort put into making that nest a safe place for that egg was a fleeting smoke. It was done in vain. And I walked downtown and I noticed all the businesses that were open just months ago. And I considered how there were once workers there, And where there were once workers, there is now emptiness. And these jobs, like the building of a bird's nest, were merely a chasing after the wind. So like this stuff, this is like what was true when Ecclesiastes was written long ago. It's like it's true today too. Like we see the vanity, the meaninglessness, the emptiness that is often associated with work today. So Hope, why are we so tempted to find value in work? Why do you think?
Yeah, so I kind of came up with this question with like, what does like the world think about work, and how are we taught about work throughout our lives? And so I was even thinking of like a young child, like how we're introduced to work. And so as you're growing up, one of the things that I was asked frequently, and I'm sure a lot of the rest of you have been as well, is what do you want to do when you grow up? Which is a super cute question. Yep. Like you hear ballerinas and firefighters, or a new one is like, I'm going to be like a YouTube entertainer or like a TikTok or an influencer is like a title that people want to do now. So it's just one of those things where you're kind of, it's like what you do. Like it becomes like a part of your identity in a way. And so I think it kind of, since it becomes part of your identity and what you do, it's something that becomes highly valued in our society. And then you keep getting those questions as you go through school, and what college are you going to go to, and what are you studying? And then once you graduate, what are you going to do with your degree? What is your job? The first question you're always asked, which has sometimes been a complicated question for me, is like, what do you do for work? And sometimes it's been like 5 different jobs for me. So that's always an interesting question. I'm now down to 2.
We just can't get away from the question.
I can't get away from the question. It's what everyone wants to know. Like, what do you do for a living?
Yep.
How do you spend your time? And for most people, you're spending at least 40 hours doing some type of work that you're paid for. And the rest of the time, like we talked about earlier, you're cleaning, you're making food, you're mowing your lawn, you're taking care of your kids. There's
kids
just a
like
lot of
100 hours or something probably.
Yeah, when are you not working?
Yeah.
When are you not achieving? Yeah. And then I think a lot of times I was thinking about this question, and a lot of your value is wrapped up in what you achieve. And it's how like we measure ourselves in society. So when I think, that's why I think we're tempted to value work and achievement, because that's how we're measured by other people, and it kind of sets your lifestyle and what you're able to do, not able to do. Yeah, there's a lot of wrapped up into it.
I think that's really good. And I hadn't considered how that work question, you get asked it, you're so right, you get asked when you're a kid, then you get asked it when you're in high school, in college, and then you get asked it the rest of your life. It is a question that chases us. Yeah. So another thing Brad talked about was the sheep goad, and how the author of Ecclesiastes says what the teacher is telling us is it's difficult to hear. It's like a sheep goad. And Brad said a sheep goad is like this long rod, and it could sometimes have a tack on the end of it. And you would kind of poke the sheep to make it go in the right direction. If it's veering off, you could correct its course. And in some ways, the teacher is saying all these things to help us course correct. So if we're trying to find all of our meaning in work, and like Hope it explained, our culture is constantly calling us to find our meaning in work. We're always asking that question. We gauge people in that way. He's kind of course correcting us, no, don't find meaning in work. It's a fleeting vapor in a sense. And when me,
I don't.
It's probably me. I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do either.
Here, I'll pause it until it ends, and then we'll jump back on.
Okay.
Okay, it ended. It ended. I don't know why it ended, but it ended right when I hit pause. We're back on. What I was saying is the sheep goad moment. The author's correcting us. When we look at the book of Ecclesiastes, we kind of categorize 5 different things that the teacher is saying this is why work is meaningless or empty. So ironically, it creates an acronym and it spells the word caged. It actually, what I did not plan that at all. It just happened. So the first I'll say is the cycle in chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. Teacher says there's nothing to be gained from work. Like generations come and go, the wind blows north and south, the river continues to run into the sea, but the sea doesn't fill up, and there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing to be gained from work. So he's like, there's this endless cycle of like monotony we get caught in, where it just feels like the same thing that was yesterday is today, and it'll be tomorrow. It's like, why do we work? There's nothing to be gained. So that's like the cycle. Hope, what's the A?
Yeah, so the A is appetite, which you can find this in Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. And it says like nothing can be gained from pleasure. And so I think that's like another thing that can become meaningless after a while, striving after like that taste of pleasure. Like you never can have enough of it. And it's also like a part of work as well. So, and then you have the next one, Stephen.
Yeah, because we often work for pleasure. You're so right.
Yeah, you work for pleasure. You work for stuff.
Yep. So we have caged, cycle, appetite, and then G, the grave. Ecclesiastes basically just says you can't take what you gain to the grave. And then he says that in chapter 5, verses 15 through 16. And then he also says in chapter 2, like, not only can you not take what you've gained to the grave, but worse, it's often left to somebody who did not work for what you gained. Like, think of like the rich parent who dies and then gives everything they gained to their spoiled kid, who is not only tempted to find value in these things, but they also didn't have to like live the cost of gaining them. And then you just have this like really spoiled kid. It's like it's kind of like Iron Man, honestly.
Yeah.
Tony Stark.
It's kind of how you see some of these like really wealthy like celebrities or business owners have decided to like not even give their children their inheritance.
Yeah.
It's kind of like just passing along.
I wish I could remember. Somebody I just read said they're gonna not give like a penny to their kids, and there was a super well-known name, but I can't remember. But yeah,
I think it's the guy who started Facebook.
Zuckerberg.
I think he's one of them.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the people who started like computer companies.
Yeah.
Or internet companies.
Yeah, so they're seeing the same thing that the Ecclesiastes is saying. Like, you can't take it to the grave, and then there's problems when it's left behind.
Yeah.
So what's the next one, Hope?
Yeah, so the next one is envy. And I think this is one that I fall into a pitfall personally.
Me too.
Being a competitive person by nature and kind of having that continue with the sports that I did. I think sometimes you can just be really driven by what your neighbor has, but it's like never satisfying. Even when you achieve more than them, it still feels pretty meaningless, at least in my own experience.
Yeah.
And it's a really vicious cycle. Someone's always going to have more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we have envy, and then we have the final one, Stephen.
Is danger. So we have cycle for C, A is appetite, G, grave, E, envy, D, danger. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, he's basically like, to the worker who builds the wall, it might fall on him. Or the person who digs the pit, it might fall into the pit. Like, there's inherent risk in all of our work. Even like, we have all these studies coming out now where, like, if you sit at your desk all day, you're going to have heart disease, or you're going to get carpal tunnel type. Like, there's risk. I feel like there's risk in everything. There's risk in raising kids. They're going to probably get you sick. Randy was at a daycare, or not daycare. She was nannying, and she was sick like every day.
Yes. Kids get you so sick.
Yeah. there's risk in being a parent. I don't know. I just feel like there's risk literally everywhere.
Yeah.
It makes me think. One time I was working with high school kids and I had to take them in a big van to the pizza shop. And as I was backing out of the parking lot in this big van, I had a fender bender with somebody in the parking lot. And I was like, that's the risk of carrying a bunch of teenagers in a huge van in a tight parking lot, is you're probably going to have a fender bender.
Well, it also makes me think of when you and Jordan used to do landscaping together in seminary. Like, you would come home and tell me these stories of what you guys did.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't think I want you to do landscaping, which is like a very normal job that people go to and do in their own homes. And
yeah, the author would say, if you mow lawns, you'll get poison ivy, you'll get sunburn, you'll hurt your back. That's what he would say in the book of Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's caged. So that's kind of like the depressing picture that the author paints or it's like the sheep goat. It's like, don't find value in these things. But then he turns around and he's like, but enjoy work. Like the verse says, in chapter 3, it says, also, everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his work. This is God's gift to man. I'm like, man, you've made this sound like a gift the whole book. You've done a good job of convincing me. But Hope, what do you think, like, what's an example of how you found enjoyment in work you participated in?
Yeah, so one thing that comes to mind, which is also something I was never really paid for, I guess you could call scholarship money payment, but I played college since I was like 5 years old through college. I played tennis. Did I say college? I played tennis.
I played college too.
I played college. Very expensive. No, I played tennis from 5 years old to college. And it was something that was a part of my family. Like, all of us played and we found a lot of enjoyment in it. And I still find enjoyment in it this day, just kind of going out and hitting a ball back and forth with like Jordan or my family, or doing tennis lessons with Elise. And but there was a season where I was in college and there's a lot of pressure into achievement and success and being the best. And I'd kind of risen to the top of my team and kind of like, this is the height of success in my college career. Like, this is as good as it gets. I am playing the top of my team, I'm playing the best players. And that's when I was like, but I no longer find enjoyment in this thing, which was very interesting. I had no longer just played for the pure enjoyment of it. I was playing for some status symbol that was very fleeting and meaningless. And then you graduate college.
Yeah.
And it's gone. No one cares. Most people don't know that I play tennis. So it's like my secret talent.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As you were explaining that, I was just thinking of how, like, with that acronym CAGED, envy was one of the things that was like, don't find meaning in work if you're like being driven by envy. And then for you, when you were able to actually enjoy tennis again, because envy robbed you of that, enjoyment was kind of like what countered envy. And I wonder, like, if enjoyment is the way you counter those things. Because the example I was going to give is it would be kind of like with the cycle. Like, when I was mowing lawns, I'm sure Jordan would attest to this, it just feels like the same day. Each day is the same as the last one. Like, you go, you sweat a bunch, you get burned, you're thirsty, things break, and you go from property to property. And I like really tried to, one thing that's cool about mowing is when you're done, the lawn looks way better. Like, you have a nice crisp sidewalk that's been edged, all the grass is even, you have the nice like pattern of the lines in the yard. And I would try to just like, I'd pause like right before I get into the truck, I'd pause and look at the lawn and just be like take a breath and be like, that looks good. And I found that actually would help interrupt that cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just take
So
a moment to appreciate what you had just done
yeah,
instead of just rushing through it.
yeah. So yeah, we won't spend time here, but I wonder if in a similar way that enjoyment can also be like the antidote to the appetite or the whatever the other ones were. Was G grave and D danger?
Yeah, and I think enjoyment is different than like what we talked about as being like pleasure. Like,
Yeah,
see,
talk
because
about that.
pleasure can be very, when I think about pleasure, it can be very like fleeting and something that's just like there for a moment. Where like enjoyment, you can be something that you find more like contentment in.
I think that's good. Yeah, in that fleeting piece, that would kind of be at the appetite. Like you can't fill your appetite, but enjoyment. You're right. I think that is like contentment. I hadn't thought that's good.
And can be experienced in a moment. It's just like this moment
Yeah,
of enjoyment, like a well done,
yeah.
good, faithful servant.
Amen. Right? That's
Yeah.
I love it. Love it. So enjoyment, in the midst of work feeling meaningless, the author calls us to enjoy. He also calls us to fear God. Um, it's funny, the author is continually saying like work can feel meaningless, but then he has a ton of warnings throughout it. If you look in our facilitation guide, there's a lot of different verses where something is mentioned about work. He has a lot of warning against slothfulness. So the answer to work feeling meaningless is not to just avoid work. Um, in fact, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. So there is still an intention that is demanded of us. And then at the end, chapter 12, verse 1, the teacher says, remember your creator in the days of your youth before the days of trouble come. And it's almost like he's saying, there's going to come a day where you experience like the pain of the danger that's involved with work, or you experience the pain of being driven by envy. In those days, it's going to be hard to remember your creator. So do it now. Like when before the day comes, like give thanks to your creator now. Lean into trusting him daily, because if you build those rhythms now before it's hard, it'll be easier when it gets hard in a sense. So those are like kind of some of the things that Ecclesiastes says. The last thing is, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, he often, as I said at the beginning, he uses the phrase, all that I saw under the sun. And we are trapped with this like under the sun perspective. Like we cannot see what God sees. And because of that, everything does feel meaningless at times. So in a lot of ways, we are dependent to receive guidance, to receive truth from God when we're in the midst of, honestly, when we're in the midst of Hevel, the smoke, the meaningless, it's hard to see. And we're dependent upon God to give us perspective. So hope you want to talk a little bit about open hands, closed hands prayer?
Yeah. So I know a lot of times after scripture, kind of like, what next? What do I do with this? And one of the practices that we've introduced before on a Sunday or in some of our small group settings, I know it's a practice that's been really impactful and meaningful in my life, has been the prayer that's called open hand, closed hands. We have put together kind of just an outline of how to engage this prayer in the facilitation guide. That's part of that's attached to the sermon for this week. But one thing that I think just it really relates to kind of what we're talking about in Ecclesiastes is you have this tension between like I'm holding on to this thing and I'm seeing like value in it, and but it's also causing me to kind of have these moments of like, oh, but it's like meaningless, or it's like let me down, or it's not actually fulfilling me in this way. And so open hand, closed hands allows you to engage in a prayer with the Lord where you're taking like your work and your achievement to him, and you're saying, Lord, this is yours, help me see it in your light, help take this burden from me that I might be carrying. And then you're like opening it up to him, but you're also allowing him to fill you with what it's supposed to actually mean in your life. And so it's a great listening prayer exercise where the Lord has spoken to me so much. I know, Stephen, you like it as well, and do a couple different versions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's kind of, yeah. Go ahead, Stephen.
I was just gonna say, I was just agreeing with you. It's so important. I think I do a variation of it each evening, and I just realize how dependent I am upon God to see His perspective. But yeah. Hope, do you have any closing thoughts? Close us out.
Yeah. So as you engage with what we just talked about and you look through the facilitation guide, I would just encourage you guys on your own to spend some time either in the morning or when you get a moment away to yourself to kind of engage in this prayer. Hopefully it can be something that can be a daily practice for you or a weekly practice. And so that's why we provided it for you as kind of like your own copy. And then on Sunday, we'll talk more about some of the stuff we talked about today, and then also engage together in a type of open hands, closed hands prayer. So, yeah. We're going to send off. I'm not good with closers.
Well, that's good. See you guys.
Yeah, see ya. Break.